Welcome to the Healthy Relationships Initiative podcast. Our goal is to provide information and tools to help you build happier, healthier, and safer relationships of all kinds. To learn more about HRI, please visit www.guilfordhri.org and check us out on social media at GuilfordHRI. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's Healthy Relationships Initiative Relationship Booster. We're glad that you're here with us today. My name is Christine Murray, and I am the Director of the Center for Youth, Family, and Community Partnerships at UNC Greensboro, as well as I oversee the Healthy Relationships Initiative. The mission of the Healthy Relationships Initiative is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds in Guilford County and beyond. And the Healthy Relationships Initiative is a partnership between UNC Greensboro and the Phillips Foundation. And if you'd like to learn more about the Healthy Relationships Initiative, we invite you to check out our website at guilfordhri.org, as well as connect with us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter at GuilfordHRI. Just a few kind of housekeeping things before we get started. We're really grateful that you're here with us for the live program, and we encourage you to submit questions as the program's going on that we can take throughout the program. We do have it set up so that you can submit your question directly to Camila Dos Santos, who's the moderator for the program, and so you can share those questions, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can throughout today's program. And before you end up signing off today, please make sure you take a minute to fill out our feedback form to let us know what helped and ways that you think that we might be able to improve. The topic for today's Healthy Relationships Initiative Relationship Booster is technology and couple relationships. And today we're joined by our featured expert, Dr. Emily Campbell. And Emily, thanks so much for being here with us. Yeah, and so if you could go ahead and just maybe share a little bit about your work experience, and especially why this topic of technology and couple relationships is something that you're interested in.
Absolutely. So my master's degree was in couples and family, mental health and counseling, and so at an early, stage in my career, I quickly learned that I was interested in couples relationships, and then that kind of evolved into my work as a doctoral student. So noticing just that there are specific impacts and ways in which people are using technology and ways in which technology can impact relationships. And so I wanted to learn about that in hopes of helping people be able to utilize technology in a way that can help enhance intimacy and help them the connection over taking away and reducing the connection. So that's what pretty much led me to here.
Great, yeah, so we'll definitely look forward to hearing more of your thoughts on this, especially based on your background with your research and your clinical experience too. And actually, for those of you who are joining us today, Emily and I are not strangers. So she actually I was her dissertation chair for her doctoral work that she did in the UNCG counseling department, and she did research on the topic of couples and technology relationship. And we did a couple studies before you got to your dissertation. And then, of course, you did your dissertation on the topic. So why don't we start there, and if you could share a few of what were some of the big key takeaways of what you learned about this topic from your research that you've done.
Absolutely. So what we learned through our research, and I think what we were seeing in other research methods as well, is that there are ways in which people use technology can either enhance intimacy, connection, or relationship satisfaction, or take away from it. And so what we also found out, there's specific individual and relational factors that influence how people use technology. So some of those factors would be people's communication, so more effective communication styles may lend themselves to utilizing technology in ways that can benefit the relationship, and less effective communication that can actually take away from how technology can benefit the relationship. Similarly with relationship satisfaction, so people who are more satisfied in their relationships may be more likely to utilize technology in ways that can continue to benefit and strengthen that relationship versus the latter. There were some information that we learned about some individual factors like gender, age, relationship duration, and so seeing that folks that are of a younger age, so the younger generation, and folks who are maybe at the beginning of a relationship, that technology was utilized more to try and keep that sense of connection. But at the same rate, it wasn't necessarily proven that it was affecting or benefiting. So it's twofold and kind of cyclical in some of the results that we see.
Yeah, no, I think what I really enjoyed most about working with you on that was especially just that perspective of the positives and the negatives, because I think a lot of times when you hear people talking about the impact of technology on relationships, and that's really whether you're talking about couples, friends, parenting, more often than not, I think people really view it as negative and distracting and, you know, all the problems that can come up. But it was really helpful to see that positive side too, which we'll definitely talk more about. So I also was really interested in some of the points you just mentioned about kind of how it impacts people at different times, or maybe people's different background characteristics might influence that. So especially younger people might be more open to it, although they are maybe more heavily using technology in all areas of their lives, so it could also be more of a distraction to them too. So what would you just say in general are some of your main thoughts about how does technology impact couple relationships specifically? And maybe especially, how has that changed in even just the past 5 to 10 years?
So how it's impacting in terms of negative or?
Maybe just kind of more general, and then actually next we'll kind of walk through some of the more specific. We'll start with some of the more negative and then move toward more positive. But just sort of generally speaking, what would you say maybe have been some trends or changes, and especially because technology has just recently really started to more proliferate people's lives?
Yeah. So I think in a way technology has become kind of an extension of people's relationships. So I think it's something that's constantly something that people need to be intentional about how they're using, because it's showing up so pervasively in their personal and professional relationships, their day-to-day routines, their day-to-day tasks. And so if that intentionality and mindfulness isn't present, there are reasons to believe that it could negatively impact the relationship. But with intentionality, I think there is room to say that it can certainly positively impact the relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, so just, I guess, in general, how people have been getting more reliant on technology in general, then we are seeing more influences on technology. And so let's kind of start to jump into some of those, maybe some of those challenges related to technology in couple relationships. So, you know, you might say with technology in couple relationships, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so let's talk about each of those, but let's go in reverse order so we can kind of end ourselves on a more positive note as we get toward the end. So let's start with the ugly. And in fact, we're doing this program in October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And so I think one of the really dark sides, potentially, of technology that, of course, is not in all couple relationships, but might be found, is that technology could be used as a platform for abuse in couple relationships. So let's talk about that to kind of make sure we spend a little bit of time on that.
Sure.
So can you shed some light on what people should understand or maybe look for in their own lives, or maybe in the lives of somebody that they know or care about, or even if they're maybe a parent of teens, what to look for to know if it's become to that, not just, you know, sort of a problem, but something that really might be a sign of abuse?
Sure. Yeah, and I think extending on that, like how people choose to use technology, right? It be impactful, and I think that people need to be aware of, just certain patterns of communication, because different modalities, there's a lot of manipulation that can go on. There's ways in which people can disguise their identity. There's ways in which people can stalk or perhaps take videos or audios without consent. So I think there's many different ways in which manipulation, aggression, control can come through technology that people certainly need to be aware of, and also can just be an extension of how that person would also show up in their face-to-face relationships as well. So definitely any type of text or written communication would certainly be an issue. There's ways of tracking people now or tapping into different technology devices in ways that can be outside of one's conscious awareness of them.
Yeah, so those are some really great examples of the ways that that might look in a couple's relationship. And I guess one thing that I would just add about that too is just that for people to take those things very seriously, and if they have things that are maybe raising concerns for themselves, or if they're sort of feeling like maybe their partner is controlling them through technology, that would be something to probably reach out for some help and get some guidance around that, as well as probably, I mean, we're kind of talking about couples mostly, but part of that is dating, and I would say especially in the early stages of a relationship, to really be mindful about building trust, and part of it is through technology too, and looking for maybe some of those red flags too. So if somebody has some concerns, do you have any thoughts about that level of possible challenges, like if technology might be being used as a tool for abuse?
Yeah, I think there's certain safety precautions that should be trying to integrate on a regular basis. And I think it does depend also on how long they've been in the relationship, and if the relationship, like how safe they feel to actually implement some of those precautions, because sometimes making some of those subtle adjustments and changes can heighten some of the abusive and controlling patterns that we may see that other people may be using in technology. But I think some of those safety precautions might be just being really mindful of password protecting and making sure you're logging out, making sure you're clearing your web browsers, being mindful of where you're using technology, community space. I think there's lovely features that also help us block and telephone numbers, and potentially even minimizing the social media print also out there. So if you're really trying to create a healthy disconnect from a pattern or cycle of abuse, to be able to kind of withdraw in those capacities. And then if one feels safe enough in terms of, and I appreciate you named that piece of community support, so I'm definitely reaching out to any authorities that we feel like could be useful legal, becoming familiar with any resource centers, professional counselors that may aid in a professional sense of support, and advocates as well, I think could be really helpful in that process so that feels alone. But I do think it depends on the degree of safety.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And I think one of the things that I think is really complicated about this issue is that what might feel controlling and unhealthy to one person actually could be viewed as normal and healthy. So, you know, sometimes, for one example, I guess I would raise, which I don't think is always across the board potentially an indicator of abuse, but it could be if it's a pattern of broader controlling dynamics in a relationship, is, for example, if partners insist on sharing each other's social media, right? So that could be because there's a strong foundation of trust, or it could be because one person is trying to control the other. So how would you suggest people kind of tease apart, even things too? I'll give another example to kind of, because it's not just about social media. Like for some people in couple relationships, I remember you and I talked about this when you were doing your research, that they might be texting each other like 100 times a day, and that would be normal for them. Whereas I know for me, if someone was texting me 100 times a day, that would not be normal, pretty much anybody, and I would probably have some, you know, red flags about that. But there's a lot of room for kind of gray area in this technology space with couples. And so I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of kind of how people can evaluate if they're in a gray area, like, oh, I don't know, is this unhealthy? Is it healthy? Is it normal? Is it even maybe unsafe? Like, how can people tease that apart?
Yeah, I think that it is very individual, each couple. But I think what feels good, safe, and fulfilling. So I don't think we can put an actual number or a piece on that. But I think if someone is feeling like there's something like scary that's driving that, or insecurity that's driving their potential pattern of trying to reach out to someone or to connect with someone, and is not feeling like that person is meeting them in that same space, and or if they're getting the opposite response to what they're hoping for, I think that could be a clear indicator. But I'm a big fan and promoter of people like really tuning inward and trusting what feels right for them. And so if I was working with someone, counseling setting around that, that's what we tune into. Like, what does this mean when someone texts you 100 times a day? How does that land? What would you like this to look like? What would you like this to feel like? and just learning to create a sense of security within self and within the context of that relationship also. And then it's okay to speak to your needs. It's okay to feel differently about how you want to integrate technology into the relationship. And I think especially at the onset of relationships, it's a very vulnerable process, and sometimes people aren't or feel safe enough or comfortable enough in themselves to be able to speak to those needs. But I think that is a platform for what that potential partner will need to expect or will expect in the relationship.
That's a great point, that this conversations about technology in many ways can be a good platform for getting to know a partner, whether you're just dating or even, especially because new technologies are emerging all the time. So even for couples who've been together for a really long time, they can be a really nice avenue for people to get to know each other and really potentially work through challenges. And I'm hearing a lot of you kind of implying around sort of having good communication about this. So, you know, for example, one of the challenges might be one partner really loves technology and really loves connecting over technology. That one person would be like, oh man, 100 texts a day sounds amazing. And the other person would be like, I don't want any text, or maybe like 2 if you need to ask me to pick up milk on the way home, right? So how can couples sort of navigate those potential conflicts or challenges in a healthy way within their relationship?
Yeah, I think one piece for me when you were saying the first part about expectations. So having really intentional conversations about what's driving my engagement and what I'm expecting to receive. And if we're able to put words on that, then we're then potentially able to differentiate between, okay, so this is maybe a love language or a need for you versus not for me, and this is what I actually need around that piece. So I think intentional conversations, but also understanding certain expectations, understanding needs, and then developing specific maybe rules, boundaries for those types of youth. So if it's potentially negatively impacting one's day to receive, say, those 100 text messages, like being able to co-create some times around when it would be more accessible or beneficial to be communicating or sending those text messages versus times when it's just not and it's distracting and overwhelming.
And I think those are really good points, because I think you know this with your work in doing couples counseling, that oftentimes what couples are fighting about is not actually really what they're fighting about. So it's not just, are we sending 20 texts a day, or are we sending 2 texts a day? Or it's not, you know, am I liking every one of your posts on social media or not? It's really, let's take a step back from those specific, really concrete things that technology provides and say, what does this mean to me? And so for one person saying, well, you know, for me, staying connected through text or social media throughout the day makes me feel connected to you, and it makes me feel, you know, like I'm still an important part of your life even when we're not together. And for the other person, they might be saying, you know, I want to focus on getting my work done when I'm at work so that then I can come home and really focus on our time together. You know, so it's really interesting, but I think a lot of times what ends up happening is like, just more like, why didn't you text me back? Or I posted this thing on social media, why didn't you like it? Or why didn't you respond to it? I saw that you were on there, you know, and so people end up, I think, getting sort of, it's another way that maybe technology kind of looks like kind of a distraction in couple relationships.
And can help create some distress and arguments and some of those attachment insecurities. This person may not care for me, or perhaps that I'm not able to be enough, so I'm going to avoid and withdraw out of this relationship. Depending on, you know, how that cycle evolves, yeah, I think that can create a sense of not only distraction but disconnect.
And we always try in these programs to be really concrete. So what are some questions or some words that people could use to raise these issues or ask about it? So one could be, for example, what does it mean to you to be sending text messages or not throughout the day? Or what does it mean to you when I like your picture? What does it mean to you when I don't like your picture on social media? So, you know, do you have any other really concrete tips or words that people can use?
Yeah. I mean, I would be curious to like, you know, how do you feel when I send that text or when I like? This is what it means to me when I I think conversations around like how do you notice this creating disconnect or distraction in a relationship? How do you think that we can use technology and help us gain a sense of connection? So I think it's some of those open-ended questions of who, what, when, how, just to really explore and trying to refrain from some of those why statements so that people can hopefully be more receptive and open to having conversations about the differences and how it influences, impacts them, as opposed to feeling defensive, like they're doing something wrong or
So really approaching it more from a sense of I'm curious about this, or if you're saying something that doesn't resonate with me, curiosity compared to maybe immediately taking offense.
Yeah, and I feel statements are wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm curious, absolutely. And just trying to, I think, step into these conversations with seeking to understand your partner's behaviors, as opposed to assuming what your partner's behaviors mean.
That's right. Like, oh, this person didn't like my picture on Facebook, and so it means they don't care about me. Maybe they didn't see it, or maybe they did see it, and maybe they just thought that they already talked to you about it or something. So trying to really assume good intentions and then approach those conversations with curiosity. And if it's a really conflict issue, then really trying to maybe work together, partly to figure out, okay, what's the balance of how many text messages a day or what time of day is okay for having that connection. But really more so like, well, how do we come together on the bigger picture issues behind that?
Yeah, and even like I think going with that example, like say at the end of the day or at the end of the they actually have time together, if that person who noticed all those things was able to broach that conversation, that like, I noticed that you were on social media today and you were posting all these things and yet you didn't like my picture that I put up or that post that I put up, and saying, that hurt my feelings, can you tell me more about that, would be an example of having an effective communication and conversation about what was showing up.
Probably best to have those conversations in person, maybe not over a text message, right?
And I would say maybe it even depends, because if there's a history of having some of those conversations and the relationship satisfaction and connection is then they might be able to use technology to navigate some of those conversations. And I would say probably the majority could be more beneficial with having face-to-face. And intentional, because if someone's rushing in or about to rush out, being intentional and respectful of your partner's day and what energy they're bringing into the situation.
And that's another kind of area for some concrete tips that we can offer, because I think that, like you were saying earlier, kind of effective communication between partners in a couple relation in general are probably going to play out in their interactions over technology, but technology also offers a lot of room for interpretation, and because you're not right with the person, you can't always necessarily ask right away, or you could ask, but you may not get the answer that you need right away. So there's a tendency, I think, for things to maybe blow up some. So one of the concepts we talk about in the couples counseling world is having a soft startup when you're approaching difficult conversations. So for example, if you were offended by something or hurt by something, rather than just saying, why didn't you do this, or why haven't you done this, to say, I just wanted to let you know I'm thinking about you today. I noticed that you didn't respond to my text message. Is everything okay? Instead of, why didn't you respond to this right away, or what's going on, or, or you're such, of course, with the Healthy Relationships Initiative, we would never advocate for people saying things like, you jerk, why don't you respond to my text message? But of course, we know couples do that sometimes, unfortunately. So, so these are all really, I think, interesting things. And some of it might, to some people who are listening, some of these examples might seem silly, but then to other people, I would say I think that there's probably a lot of fighting over things like this and misunderstandings that happen over technology. So it's better to just sort of be open about it and be direct about it as we're talking about this, so people can understand that sometimes something that might seem like kind of a small issue in couple relationships, they can get to be bigger, right? And I think especially like we were just talking with the technology piece, with it not being, I'm sitting right here with you right now, I can see the tone of voice I can hear the tone of voice you use to say this versus just reading 2 sentences in a text message, that we can talk it through more.
Yeah, this contextual factor.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it looks like we have a question that's come through. Camilla?
We do. So the boundaries around what is an appropriate online behavior for someone in a relationship can be vague. So how can couples proactively work through and establish these boundaries, especially as it pertains to social media?
Great question.
Yeah. So let's dive in a little bit to social media and talk about those boundaries and how couples can navigate that. So that's a great question. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to a pattern of communication. So to co-create and collaborate on creating specific boundaries and intentions with what that looks like. If that's from, we're only going to use this type of social media platforms, to what we're agreeing to post on social media platforms in terms of individual, but also relational pieces. I see this show up actually quite often more with parents, new parents and their children. Like what pictures, what do we want to share, about our child? Can we agree on what that is on the social media platform? And I think it also depends on I think a sense of security there. So having conversations about what needs are being met in the relationship and what our partners might be seeking out in terms of relational needs, but also individual needs and through their social media use. And so maybe for some people, I've seen that means, not engaging with people of specific people. Maybe there's people that they've had other relationships with prior to being in the present relationship. So there might be some boundaries around engaging in those conversations or no conversations, or maybe no conversations with new folks that evolve past the actual post. So again, I think each couple is going to have a different way of navigating this, but having very open and honest conversations are those building blocks to having ongoing conversations, because there isn't just one black and white, right or wrong answer to this evolving process. And I think trust is of essence, so it depends on how much I think folks are trusting their partners to engage in social media with specific boundaries in terms of their energy and emotion and intent.
Yeah, and the really tricky part about all of this for couples, and even if we're talking about friend relationships, but especially with couples parenting, is this is a new world in many ways. We didn't even have a lot of the technologies that we had 15 years ago, and even 10 years ago, and even 5 years ago. Things look so different, and research like yours and other research that's out there is starting to help to look at these things, but we don't really have clear answers from research to tell us, answers to really concrete questions like, is it okay to be friends with an ex on Facebook or to be connected with somebody on Instagram? So, and really I think that's another area where there aren't necessarily rules, and there's nothing you could necessarily say that potentially applies to all. I mean, there's probably certain extreme boundaries that we can put, but some people may stay friends with people that they were in former relationships with, and might be totally comfortable because they have that foundation of trust and there's no threat, and they have other pieces in place. And for other people, that might make them extremely uncomfortable. And you can have those same two people in a relationship. And so I think what's important for people to hear is that there's not, aside from maybe some really extreme things that we could clearly say, like this would not be healthy to be finding an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, let's say, online and sharing out your deepest, darkest secrets with that person before you're sharing that with your partner. For me, it's hard for me to imagine a case where that's maybe a healthy thing, for example, unless your current relationship is unsafe and you're seeking help. But in general, your current partner should be the one that you're sharing with and things like that. And if you're, spreading it with somebody you had a previous relationship, that probably crosses the line. But that's a pretty extreme example. It might just be like if your ex-partner posts something and you like it or you comment on it. Like that gets into, that's a lot of gray area there. And so what you're saying, it sounds like mostly is just bringing good communication skills and really working through it together. And I would think to add to that also, like addressing it up front too. Let's not wait till it becomes a problem, or let's wait till it first comes up And now we know, oh, this is something we need to talk through. So hopefully that answers that question. I think it's a great one because that is a lot of really, there's a lot of muddy waters there, and unfortunately, I think just there's not clear guidance that us from a couples counseling background can come in and say, like, well, here's what you do and here's the right thing for everybody. Yeah, we say, maybe set some really clear boundaries, but then it needs to be an ongoing conversation over time.
And I love just how, like, normalizing that part of the process. It is a challenge for a lot of folks because it is gray, and we feel more comfortable in that black and white, concrete world. And that's where we have to, go back to what is safety in this relationship, what feels good for this relationship, what kind of communication do we have in this relationship, be able to navigate those nuances. And
even at what stage in the relationship too. So can you say a little bit more? You spoke about this earlier, but that couples often use technology different early in the relationship compared to later. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. It seems like it's a way of initiating relationships, a way of trying to maybe test the waters and get to know someone, essentially before having face-to-face interaction or frequency of face-to-face interaction. So it's kind of filling the space in between those interactions. But I think people gain a sense of people's communication patterns through those initial conversations, through technology, and it seems like, or a pattern at least that I think I've observed or seen, is that when people connect, they meet randomly at a place, they get one another's telephone numbers, they start engaging in text message, and then they kind of start getting and sharing social media pieces and being friends in different social media realms. And then you start getting a better sense of who this person is, how they relate, some of their interests, and then again, going back to the communication patterns, you can see perhaps if someone is sending those 100 text messages a day to try and quickly gain a sense of connection that may feel comfortable or uncomfortable to you. And so it just gives another platform and essentially for some people a safety barrier for understanding people before they continue to engage in more of those face-to-face dating relationships.
I imagine it kind of evolves too, just similar to how the face-to-face aspect of a couple's relationship too, where you just sort of think the beginning kind of honeymoon, infatuation phase, there's probably a lot of flirtatious text messages or social media interaction or other sort of technology-based communication between them. And then, you do think like the stereotype after they've been together for a really long time is like, hey, can you pick up milk on your way home? Or, like, what time are you getting the kids? And I think one thing too to say about that too, and we'll talk about this as we start to talk more about how couples can connect through technology, but it's kind of like, maybe that's something to enhance your relationship, to really build in some of that more. Like if you used to send a lot of flirtatious text messages early on in the relationship, but now it's more about the logistics of running your day-to-day life. Like how can you bring some of that back in to help use the technology as a way to kind of connect too? And that's just across the board too. Of course, it's not just through technology.
I do appreciate you naming that piece about the earlier stages and the flirtatious behavior. I definitely think that is relevant, and whether it's face-to-face or through the technology used, but a common pattern just in couples relationships when something is new and fun and different and exciting, but how can we continue to foster that spark over the course of the relationship?
Right, there's ways that you can definitely do that. So one thing that's, I think it's kind of a challenge, but it's also a strategy for connecting. So obviously I think just being a technology as a distraction is just a common theme across the board for all kinds of relationships. We see it in couple relationships, we see it in parenting, we see it in kids and their friendships, we see it at workplaces where people might be in a meeting and somebody's on their phone, somebody's on their laptop, nobody's really engaged in the sort of face-to-face interaction. So kind of acknowledging that and again naming that as a challenge that a lot of couples face. What are some things they can do to put boundaries around how much technology becomes a distraction and then really being present even in our technology-driven world?
Great question. I think I would want to even take a step back and think about like how are couples defining quality time and getting an idea of what that means for each partner, and if that can involve technology and or doesn't need to involve technology. And then I think based from there, then folks can start to construct specific maybe days of the week. So whether that's going to be work days or weekends and or both, certain times within the day, in which we may have technology-free zones of time, where we may choose to, a 3-hour block on a Thursday evening, choose to cook dinner together and then watch a Netflix show, and then like a hybrid of technology and that face-to-face communication and creating a quality moment with our partner. But I think, like frequency, duration, and verbally establishing what those boundaries and expectations need to look like, and making sure that they're very reasonable. So everyone has potentially different work schedule and different needs throughout their day, whether it is connecting through language or just connecting by sitting and sharing space together. So I think each couple would certainly need to define that and then be very clear about what they need and how to co-create that in their living space.
And it's also a really good point about being realistic and having really realistic expectations about this, because if you do have somebody that, say, has on-call as being part of their job, or maybe their job has a lot of flexibility in it, but they have to be available at certain times of day, to be open about that, kind of when are those times. Probably almost everybody would have certain times in their day where they could keep the phone, farther away, or maybe there's other ways that they can sort of keep it a little bit separate or distant without having to necessarily, if they're on call, it might seem unrealistic to say, well, we need to set the phone. Don't respond to that. It might be like, okay, maybe you can check the phone every 30 minutes or something in that case, or keep it close by, but only respond when it is that one number calling from your work or something. It's just how do you navigate that, and then definitely carving out some technology-free times, but then also I think it's important for people, even in those technology-free times, to think about other distractions too, and for people to be really intentional about carving out time for that real face-to-face connection, because relationships really need that one way or another. Do you have any other thoughts on that, or?
No, I think, those are great points. And when you were speaking to even just like putting the phone aside, thinking about when people choose to even just put their phone on silent,
right?
To where we're not constantly being activated or reminded that there's something, an email there or a text message there, where our minds are being, I think, retrained just to kind of still be quiet, be present, as opposed to all these other directions that we're constantly going in mentally, emotionally, physically throughout our days.
And I think for people too, it gets down to really looking also at very specifically kind of how are you using your technology and what does that look like, and are there things that you can put in place so to help you avoid the temptation to be distracted maybe. So I know, for example, for me, recently, probably within the past few months, I started removing my work email from my phone by like 5:30 or 6 at night, most days. Some days I need to keep it on because there's something that I'm waiting for, but most days I try to disconnect it. I intentionally have to go in and uncheck the box that I don't want my email on there anymore. For some people, that might be removing the Facebook or Instagram app on your phone over the weekends, for example, or for weeks at a time. Or in general, I know some people make a rule where they say they never check social media on their phone. They only do it when they're at a computer, for example. So as often we think of it as like, oh, put the phone away. But sometimes it's even really drilling down a little bit to say, well, actually, the thing that I tend to get most sucked into is this. Or the thing that, one of the reasons for me with the email was I was noticing sometimes I would get an email that would kind of, whether it upset me or it just got me thinking about something. So even though I might put my phone away afterward, I noticed that it makes it then harder to stop thinking about that one thing. So that was a really big step for me to kind of take for boundaries to protect my relationships and my own kind of self-care and my sleep too. But, but even like for people to really, maybe to some extent even, I always think it's helpful to, if you're not sure exactly what's most impacting you, to spend a week where you sort of log and keep a journal where you're writing down like, oh, wow, I was doing this thing, or this is how I felt when I was doing, A, B, or C in the evening or during the time when I was supposed to be with my partner or with my family.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And experimenting, too. I think, like, I really like that piece that you're about even if we don't feel like we have that ability to control, like maybe that impulse to like turn to the technology as opposed to turning ourselves or to our partner, to make it harder for ourselves by removing specific features or apps. I think that's a great idea, and cultivating a sense of more mindfulness through journaling or creating some type of a log to where there's a process of what's happening, not just a quick insight around the process, and then what's the next thing, and then we forget what had just happened right there. So I think that's wonderful ideas.
So let's talk a little bit more about some other ways that couples can connect over technology. And one of the things I really remember the most and enjoying the most about this research that we did and your study was asking people for some specific examples of the ways that they use technology to help strengthen or support their relationship. And I just remember some really concrete sort of things that some people, of course, talk about. We have a shared calendar, which helps us to remember things together that we're doing. Doing the Netflix together, that sort of thing, having favorite shows that they watch together. What are some other maybe creative examples just to give people who are listening some ideas? Because, of course, again, it's always going to be what works most for that particular person or that particular couple. But sometimes people may not think like, oh, this, you know, my camera on my phone could be a way to connect with my partner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. I named it I think a little bit earlier, but kind of recultivating that spark through intentional uses, through whether it be a text message or videos of, hey, thinking about you, hey, you know, I love you, or hey, I know you, like checking in, hey, I know you were anxious about this particular presentation, curious to hear how it went. So kind of checking in, communicating love, affection, affirmations, I think is a great way to connect. And now we have emojis and different just ways of expressing ourselves in fun and creative ways.
And just real quick with that too, I would add that something, because some people are kind of forgetful, or you might not even be a forgetful person, but you can be really busy, but like even setting a calendar reminder. So if you know your partner has this big meeting at 10 a.m., set that calendar reminder for 9:45 and hey, oh yeah, let me send a quick text message. It might take you 5 seconds to send the message, get in there. And that way you're kind of being intentional about it.
Yeah, and I think those little things can really feel like have that high impact, like that we're talking about. And then thinking about like the pictures, I think technology is a really cool and creative way of creating those memories and being able to either look back on them or even create something fun and exciting like printing off a photo album and or being able to look back on memories and special occasions. With your partner as well. I think we've kind of subtly mentioned this, but we can definitely use technology in order to like schedule dates. So maybe it's kind of, you know, middle of the week and you're like, hey, it'd be so fun to go out to dinner. Let me do that, coordinate that. Maybe it's just trying to ease some of the errands or the responsibilities of coordinating, like, you know, who's going to pick up the kids tonight? I had to stay late for work, or you go into the grocery store and get some of these pieces, but that helps the chaos of the day flow easier. And we know if we're less stressed, then we also have more ability to connect with each other and not get stuck in the nitty-gritty of the stressors.
Yeah, that's a great point, and definitely not minimizing that side of technology too, because technology can help with a lot of those pieces of managing kind of the day-to-day life of the household, or even if it's two partners who are in a couple relationship but maybe they don't even live together, there's still scheduling, logistical kind of challenges, ways they can help each other out. And so how can they use technology as a platform for doing that? And I wouldn't recommend partners initiate all of their dates this way, but it definitely seems like if you know your partner does a lot of scheduling or, you know, works a lot in their calendar, just send them like random calendar invite and say, hey, like, let's go on a date, and like maybe write something special or some like personal joke or, you know, way of asking that might be meaningful for them. And, you know, that is the big thing too, because honestly, like, in the past, before we had technology and calendars and everything like at our fingertips, it might be harder for people to remember significant dates or anniversaries, birthdays, even smaller dates, but even using like a calendar invite. I had a friend at one point that she and her husband used, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to celebrate their monthly anniversary. And I thought, wow, that would be so hard to remember every month, but really you could just set a calendar, invite every single month, and, you know, kind of use those things. Think about creative ways that you can kind of leverage these tools, because whether we like it or not, technology is a part of our lives. And so if we can really think through how can we use these tools to help us connect in our relationship. And of course, some of the negative things are always probably going to be there, the distraction piece, but you know, really thinking about how can we get connected. And I guess, do you have any special tips for couples, especially who are really busy? We know people today, how are you? I'm busy. You know, that's what we all answer to that question. So, you know, when you have really busy couples, and which is a challenge, how can they possibly especially use technology?
I mean, I think text messaging is one of the, I've seen and heard and experienced myself, is one of the quickest, fastest, effective ways of utilizing technology, connecting on the go in the day-to-day routine. And then sometimes that may be like a short video like that, but I would say that using a calendar, those two things you just gave, but I think those are the quickest, most high-impact ways.
That's a great point. And then I think also too, kind of to even take that a step further, like maybe we could like challenge people who are listening to this to think, okay, what's my normal way of relating over technology? And what's one thing I could do to like enhance that for more connection, right? So if I'm sending a text message, could I use an emoji or use a GIF or send a little video along with my message, or just some way to kind of personalize it a little more, and kind of helping people to think through, just like taking that little extra step. A lot of times for couples, don't you think it's true that a lot of times for couples it's like, you know, the little things really go a long way?
Absolutely. And it's the day-to-day thing versus the grandiose big pieces. Like those can be lovely, but it's how are we navigating day-to-day interaction, and are we walking away from our partner? Those little pieces and intentional moments really cultivate that in a relationship.
Yeah, and it may not take a lot of time or effort, but just doing it shows that effort, and it means a lot to people often. And so for people to really understand that those things that might seem really simple can really go a long way in their relationship.
Yeah, simple is wonderful.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's simple.
And a lot of people don't really understand that having some sort of connection throughout a day really can help your time together. When you're apart, maybe, can help your time together to really go better, because you kind of have that little connection throughout the day. You kind of know how your partner's day is going, and then you come home, and maybe you've kind of had an ongoing conversation or ongoing check-ins throughout the day, and so it's maybe easier to come together too. So that's, I think, another piece too, is for people to remember that technology doesn't have to be this kind of separate thing, like it's either, oh, the technology aspect of your relationship and then our face-to-face interactions, but really there's a lot of blending of those interactions that can really help to enhance couples' relationships. Yeah. So do we have any questions? It looks like we do have a question that came in.
Okay. Yes. So we were talking earlier a little bit about some negative behaviors and online, and so what are some signs that online behaviors are starting to become abusive, specifically for parents who might be monitoring teenage relationships and those types of situations?
I think frequent feed would be an issue, and how the child or the individual is responding to those engagements. So are they left feeling like they're scared or not able to exercise their sense of autonomy or independence in that relationship? Controlling language would definitely be a red flag in terms of just a red flag for people to.
I think I would add too, maybe reciprocation. So if both people are like, yeah, 100 text messages a day or more, or something less than that is what they want. But if it's like repeated, where are you, why haven't you responded to my text message, 10 or 15 unresponded to messages, I would say really, especially for parents, just what you were just saying, to really be looking for the controlling aspect of that, and is it kind of two-sided? So it builds trust in couples' relationships potentially if they agree to share passwords on social media. But if it's one person is expected to share and then the other person is not, that is not reciprocated, and that could really be a sign that one partner is more controlling or potentially abusive compared to the other.
And I think with that reciprocation piece to that consent,
right,
with that process, so is someone like using the password and sharing it.
Right.
Like that also.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely teaching good, solid tech safety, especially if you're a parent of a teen as they're starting to enter dating relationships. That really, I'm glad that somebody asked that question, because that really is an essential part of parenting and talking with teens as they're starting to date, and even college students, and even other people too, really having that part of it and understanding what that looks like.
And it's really so cool to say, like, no means no.
Yeah.
And being able to really support that in the conversations that we're having with friends, and encouraging them to use that in their relationships, whether it be via technology or face-to-face as well.
And that is such a good point, because we often have thought of that saying of no means no more in the context of sexual assault, but you could have that same sort of thing happening through technology, potentially, whether it's somebody forcing the person that they're dating to send pictures of a certain nature that they are not comfortable. So that freedom to be able to say no, to be respected and valued in that relationship. And if it doesn't have that, then that's the bigger piece, kind of, that could summarize a broader description of how we look at those behaviors. So we are coming to the end of our time, if you can believe it. It always goes so quickly. So what are some of your kind of big picture takeaways that you hope that people will walk away from today's program with?
Well, I hope that people feel a sense of hope, and I hope people feel a sense of just being realized about how challenging it can navigate technology, and that with some of the things that hopefully that we've talked about today, that people can feel a bit more informed, a bit more intentional, and kind of gain a sense of control over how they're using technology and how it's showing up in their relationship, so they can gain from it as opposed to feeling like it's really taking away from the relationship. And just, I really think that mindfulness of really encouraging people just to slow down, to be intentional, to do the simple things, and just notice when we're turning to technology versus turning to our partners. It can be those subtle moments where, instead of reaching for the phone, we reach over to the partner, right? So the mindfulness, the intentionality, just really utilizing technology in a way that we feel like can benefit us individually and as a couple overall.
And I really like that you ended on this message of hope, because I do think most people probably coming to this program are probably like, oh, technology is such a bad thing for relationships. But I think we've really talked today about how it can be a powerful tool for helping people to connect. And I think for my closing thought, I would just sort of say, really reiterate that point, that technology, it's really just a tool for couples in relationships. And it can be a tool for good, and it can be a tool for bad and for conflict. And so really, like you said, I think a lot of the things that we've talked about help empower people to understand that they can make decisions that can help promote health overall in their relationships through the ways that they're navigating technology between them, as well as the boundaries they're setting with the technology and the outside world too. So, well, thank you so much for sharing with us and for sharing some of your wisdom and your experiences. So we thank all of you for being here with us for this program too, and we hope that it was helpful for you to achieving happier, healthier, and safer relationships of your own in your own life. Before you sign off, please do take a quick minute to fill out our feedback form. And for those who are interested, we have our next relationship booster will be on Friday, October 18th, so 2 weeks from today. And our topic is going to be effective co-parenting after divorce. So we hope to see you then. Thank you so much for joining us.